So, Kelly, obviously, we're not special. We didn't get the special 7800 packages from Atari. But you know what? I didn't hold it against them. We already did a skip it, listed buy it. Spoiler alert, I bought it, which I said I was going to do. And even though I don't have the fancy box, I'm still quite happy with my purchase so far.
Yeah,
So, what have your thoughts been looking at this thing?
well, from afar, so I'm going to be very interested in a hands-on type of thing. But it tracks kind of with our conversation on the Skip It, Listen, Buy It, which you folks should probably go back and listen to and subscribe to the Bog Panda YouTube channel so you can see more of this kind of content if it interests you. But it looked so visually looked fantastic, looked really great. Wireless controllers, liked that. I was a little suspect of the controllers themselves, so I'm going to be interested to see what your experience on that is. Playing both 7800 and 2600 cartridges, except for stuff like the movie cart, super cool. So it had a lot going for it. And if I didn't have a very durable Sears Telegames Atari system, I'd probably give that a decent look. But there's a an orphan first or second generation Xbox that I may be getting here pretty soon, and so I don't know if I'm going to have room to because it's not a mini. It's bigger than a mini console, but probably it's a little bit smaller than like your Vader. Is that fair?
Yeah, it's definitely smaller than the Vader. So I don't have an original 7800 to compare it to size wise. I've watched a number of videos that are out there though of people who do. It seems like it's like 80 to 90% of the size. It's a few inches smaller when you put it end to end. It's not that much smaller though. This is not a mini console. And part of what's taken up that room, a couple people did pop them open in videos. Very similar to the Hyperkin. The way that this works is there's a cartridge dumper in there that dumps the ROM and then sends it over to a single board computer, Raspberry Pi style, to play it off of. So whereas the minis are just the single board computer, this is dumping the ROM off of a cartridge.
Gotcha. So you've had some time. I'm sure you've been playing a lot of Ninja Golf. Uh,
I have.
um, so share your experience with the Panda Army.
So I think the first thing for people to know is kind of what the 7800 is. Now, were you a 7800 adopter at all?
I was not. It was in terms of consoles, it really went from 2600 to nothing for a while to Nintendo 64.
So you skipped the whole NES, Super Nintendo, Genesis kind of era? Okay.
Yep.
Well, so in doing research for this, so my introduction to a 7800, I'd never seen a 7800 in the wild. A lot of people still had their 2600s. Those were still, commonplace when I was a kid, although the NES was very quickly dominating the video game market. 2600s were everywhere. I knew other Atari consoles existed, but I never actually saw somebody with a 5200 or 7800. The 5200 kind of crashed and burned right away because it was in the the midst of the console crash that Atari themselves basically caused from their poor decision making. And the games that were being released for it were essentially just upgraded versions of 2600 games. So that wasn't, you know, convincing people to put the additional funds out for it. It also wasn't natively backwards compatible. You had to buy an expensive adapter for it to play your existing library of 2600 games. So they partnered with another company to develop the 7800, which they thought was going to dig them out of this hole. And at the time it was developed, it was actually graphically extremely impressive. It was far superior to anything that was out on the market. But Atari's Atari, and they're going to Atari all over it the way that they, they're known to Atari on things sometimes. And they went to the company that was developing it and they were like, hey, instead of using the way better sounding but slightly more expensive Pokey audio chips that were the 5200, we want you to go all the way back to the 7800 sound chip.
The
So
2600 sound chip, you mean?
I'm sorry, the 2600 sound chip for the 7800. And they were like, that doesn't make sense. And they're like, we're Atari. We have to go print another 20 million copies of ET and see what happens. So begrudgingly, the company did this for them. And with kind of the idea in their head that, well, hokey sound chips could be built into the cartridges if they need to be. Atari wasn't really keen on that either, but it didn't matter because even though they had this significantly more powerful than everything that was out on the market system, Atari was sold to the Tremels, who came from a PC background and decided to move Atari away from gaming consoles. And even though the 7800 was already made, like the consoles were already manufactured, they just shelved it in a warehouse and it didn't come out. And during the next couple of years, Nintendo came out here as the NES and just absolutely took over the video game marketplace. Master System came out as well and did okay in its own right, but nothing like the monolith that Nintendo was. Atari, of course, turned down the opportunity to distribute the Nintendo here because they didn't want anything to do with consoles at the time. So, seeing that their computer line wasn't taking off the way they thought it would, and consoles were big again, they were like, hey, didn't we make a console a few years ago? Let's just put that out now. Wasn't it really impressive a couple years ago? Let's put that out now. So they released the 7800 in the midst of the NES and Master System, where it didn't look as impressive anymore from these systems. So it's one of those, 32X Doom situations where it's like, this could have been great had they not screwed up the way that they handled it. Atari, and literally shelved the systems that they had made for like 2 or 3 years and then tried to release it after Nintendo had already taken over the entire console marketplace. Add to that, it sounded like Atari 2600 games because of the old chip. So, not a lot of games were produced for it. Only two of them ended up adding additional sound chips to it. It was adopted pretty widely by the homebrew community, though, because it could do a lot of stuff graphically. And, to do a side by side, are you a Dandy fan at all, Kelly?
A dandy fan?
Yeah, are you a Dandy guy,
Yeah,
Kelly?
I'm a bit of a dandy. Yeah,
You're a bit of a Dandy.
yeah.
So there was an Atari computer game called Dandy, which was meant to be shorthand for Dungeons and Dragons, which they didn't have the license to. So they called it Dandy, which is meant to be DND, but spelled Dandy.
Clever.
Not the greatest name. um, but it was a dungeon crawler game that Atari distributed for their computers. They thought that meant that they could make their own version of the game that they didn't own. So they renamed it Gauntlet and made an arcade version of the game. And then the creator was like, hey, you don't own that. You just distributed it and sued them. So they had to pay him, but then they could release Dandy on other platforms. So for the 2600 and 7800, they renamed it Dark Chambers because Gauntlet was already involved in its own kind of controversy with Nintendo because Atari was making unlicensed cartridges for the NES while they were also trying to fight for the 7800. So just lots of great decisions were being made by Atari around this time. So a really good example of where it stacks against the Nintendo, and obviously it falls short of the NES because it's a couple years older. But if you look at Gauntlet, the unlicensed Atari Nintendo game, that game has to use helper chips inside the cartridge for you to move around the screens and have it scroll along with you in multiple directions for the 8 directional scrolling of the screen. Whereas Dark Chambers, the 7800 version, doesn't look anywhere near as good as the NES version, but is doing all of the same things without any sort of helper chips. It's just doing it natively on the hardware. So there was definitely power there and some cool stuff that it could do, but Atari. So I never played any 7800 games until around 2020. That's when the Atari collections started to come out for different things. And occasionally these 7,800 games would pop up on there. And I discovered the amazing, amazing game, Ninja Golf, which I would argue with anybody, and you can fight me on this, is one of the greatest ideas for a game ever. What if you were a ninja who played golf? It's kind of all in the title, but it's really, really good. You hit the ball, and while you run to your ball, you're attacked by other rival ninjas and various wild animals. And then once you get onto the green, instead of putting, which is boring in a traditional golf game, you fight a dragon with ninja stars. That's how sports games should be.
No argument here. It's
Yeah,
good, sounds like a super solid plan.
that's how you do it. So I tried a few 7,800 games, and then of course the fight stick came with a pretty good selection of games. I think there's about 20 on there, which there was only like 50 some games released for it. So that was a pretty good selection of games. Then of course there's things like Super Console X. So I have a pretty good base now of these games over the last 5 years, 5, 6 years. So I really wanted a 2600 plus just for the ease of having a HDMI port on there, not have to go through the different options that are available to make it work on a modern TV, sort of. So when they announced this, I ended up buying the Vader console, which looks awesome. But that was so we could play the movie carts, which won't play because this has to dump the ROM on there, and the movie cart's basically running off of the cartridge rather than the ROM. So it won't play on there. So this gave me an opportunity to kind of get the same thing, but also the 7,800 form factor. So it does look different in the room than the 2,600 does. So I like that. It's based off of the PAL version of the 7,800. So the rainbow stripe is a little bit thicker. Some people have really strong opinions about that. And it comes with the controller instead of a joystick, which the PAL versions did. I think that coming with the controller is a good idea because these are 2 button games similar to NES and Master System. So it makes sense. My only problem with the controller, and it's wireless, which is nice, and it also comes with the USB adapter in case you wanted to use it on any other USB systems.
That's a good
Um,
thing to mention. That's the kind of thing a guy should have mentioned, I don't know, a show or two ago about his Nintendo or his Nintendo 64 controller that it had a USB stick, but he didn't mention it at that point in time. But yeah, good to hear. Nice complete delivery of information. Good job.
I try. It's also a little larger in the hand than an NES or Master System controller. Master System controllers are more or less the same as an NES controller. They were different color, but size wise, they're about the same. The wire was on the side of it, so it was a little more awkward to hold. But the Famicom was like that, the original version of the NES. So this is a little bit bigger, but my only complaint about it is the buttons are oddly spaced. And this seems in line with the original controller. So it's a little weird to complain about because they're just keeping it true to the original design. But I included a picture here of it next to an actual NES controller. And you can see that the buttons are basically in the center of where it would be in the controller for an NES controller. So it'd be like playing with your start and select button instead of where the A and B button are. So it's kind of awkward to hold. That's my only real complaint about it, though. I like that it's wireless. Pairing it was simple. I didn't have any kind of issues. I also like what they're doing with the cartridges. So my thing with buying this was obviously, as Kelly and I have spoken about before, we're both big Atari guys. We can play these games a million different ways. This to me was really more about supporting homebrew games, which I've already ordered a couple off of Atari Age. So I'm just waiting on those. And then Atari themselves have started taking on some of the homebrew games and giving them official Atari licensed releases. And that's their plus line of games. So you can see if you look at, I included a picture of Asteroids Deluxe, which was a homebrew game that has the plus label at the top, whereas the Ninja Golf reissue cartridge doesn't, because that's an original 7,800 game. It also comes with a pack-in game of Bentley Bears Crystal Quest. So one of the big things that it seems the 7,800 community feels would have made a big difference back in the day would be if the 7,800 had a proper side-scrolling platform game. There's only one platformer in the original lineup, a game called Scrapyard Dog, and a lot of people felt that wasn't the one. That wasn't going to do it. They needed a mascot character the way that Sega had Sonic, Nintendo had Mario. The closest thing really that 2600 had was Bentley Bear. He was in Crystal Castle, which, led to the lawsuit with State Farm that we covered on this show before. He was also in some like edutainment games for their computer line, and then on the Atari Jaguar later in Atari carts. So I mean, he's the closest thing to like a mascot character that they really had. So are you a Bentley Bear guy at all?
Um, I am. I'm a little bitter. I mean, so it would have been so Crystal Castles, love Crystal Castles, arcade version, uh, better than Atari versions, but still decent gameplay for Atari versions as well. I always had a bit of a grudge against Bentley because he did seem to have the edge in being the mascot, which I felt treated Custer very poorly. But that's just me.
That's fair. That's fair. So I mean, he is the closest thing to their Mario. So in the homebrew community, they came up with this game. There's a programmer whose name somehow slips me right now, so it's right there. That's his name, making Kelly do extra work to add that. You will find in for most people who are really knowledgeable of the 7800, that guy right there, he is basically hailed as the greatest programmer for 7800, and I can see why. So I've played two of his games now. Bentley Bear, which was the pack-in. Again, that was a homebrew game that Atari has decided to not only make official, but make the pack-in game. And it really makes sense because it shows off really the absolute limits pretty much of what the system could possibly do. It looks in line with early NES games, kind of like a little more Adventure Island, Wonder Boy type thing than Mario, but it's that side-scrolling type game that it didn't really have as a system. It has Bentley Bear. The music for it is excellent. That's because it's using a Hokey chip, which is the modern equivalent of the Pokey chips. So it is using a chip. It's also significantly larger, the game itself, in terms of the ROM size, than most 7800 games were. 7800 cartridges in the original run could hold up to 48K on there. This game is 144 kilobytes. So again, that's very small, but it's huge compared to what games originally size wise we're looking at. Plus, it has the helper chip in there. So, I mean, it's doing stuff the original lineup of games couldn't really do. So it is very, very impressive, though, that this was made by, somebody from the homebrew community. He also had done some ports of classic Atari games for the 7800 that it really originally didn't get ports of. So that includes Asteroids Deluxe and games like Frenzy and Berserk. So I don't have Frenzy and Berserk, but I'm going to talk about those first because we need to talk about some of the negatives in some people's eyes of this system. Frenzy and Berserk are big, big complaint points for a lot of people. So when he did his homebrew of Frenzy, it also included on the same cartridge a full port of Berserk to the 7800. So you got both of those on one cartridge. When Atari took it over and gave them the official releases now, it's two separate games. They're not on the same cartridge. And people are mad about that because it's obviously, Atari trying to sell more games. They are a business, so they do need to do that. I do understand that. But also they have released like different collections now. So some people are also confused as to why they're not doing it as a collection, and this is getting two different cartridges. So I haven't played either one. I'm sure they're great based on the ones that I did play. But I will say this, and I'm not defending Atari, but just something I've noticed as an outsider looking at it. The fully packaged version of the homebrew of Frenzy was $55 that it was being sold for on Atari Age. So that got you the cartridge with both games, the box, and the manual. These two separate cartridges from Atari, which have their own boxes and manuals, are $30 each. So buying both of them, you're only winding up spending $5 more, and you're getting separate cartridges, boxes, and manuals. So it doesn't, when you put it in that perspective, it doesn't seem like as big of a cash grab, in my opinion.
Yeah, but typical to Atari, we'll make more money if we split
Yeah.
it. And yeah, $5 more.
Five whole dollars.
And there won't be any kickback, any goodwill problems, any of that. Well,
No.
those $5 are worth it. Uh,
The only thing I can think of, so to give Atari the benefit of the doubt, let's assume this isn't just trying to make five more dollars. Here's the thing that popped into my head. Maybe I'm wrong. I have no insider information. I don't have a special box for my 7800. So maybe I'm totally wrong. I think that maybe Berserk has a little more name recognition than Frenzy does. So maybe following the Christmas holiday, they thought more people are likely to pick up a $30 copy of Berserk than a $50, 40 or $50 double pack of both games. And then that person loving it will come back and spend another $30 on Frenzy. So I'm thinking that might be where their head was at with it.
so you write music for a large insurance company. You come up with rationale to defend Atari's indefensible change. You're a corporate shill, Mike.
I
I'm
really am.
sorry, folks. I'll try and keep a balanced view on it, but we got, Mr. Big Business over here. But okay, that's fine.
That would be my guess of where their head was at with it. So another thing people were wondering is they also released his homebrew ports of Asteroids Deluxe and the third Asteroids game that I can't remember the name of for some reason off the top of my head. Space Duel. Space Duel. So apparently on the homebrew version of Asteroids Deluxe, that was also two games in one cartridge because he did a port of the arcade version of Asteroids. So Asteroids was released for 7800. I believe it was the pack-in game with the original release of the system, but it was completely redone for the 7800. So on his port of Asteroids Deluxe, it is a port of the arcade version of Asteroids that you could unlock on the same cartridge. That's still intact. I picked up Asteroids Deluxe. Now, I'm not a huge Asteroids fan. I like it. I'm not the biggest fan of it in the world, but after playing Bentley Bear, and again, my main reasoning for getting this was to support homebrew developers. So I wanted to pick up another homebrew game, and I also wanted to buy something else through the Atari Plus line because I hope Atari does more of this. And obviously, if they sell enough of these, they'll keep doing it because money. That's how money works. So this was kind of killing two birds with one stone. I'm supporting a homebrew developer and supporting Atari, so hopefully they do more of this. So I can attest you can still unlock the original asteroids on this cartridge, which is interesting because the way that you did it was through a button combination when you initially inserted the cartridge on the original when you powered on the original one. So you would think with the cartridge dumper it wouldn't work on this, but it does. And there's actually a big hint on how to do it in the instruction booklet, which I included a picture of here. But I'll tell you if you don't want to hear it, earmuffs. So what you do, uh, the 7800 was one of the first systems to have a pause button, but it wasn't on the controller like it would be later on the NES. It was on the system itself. So if you hold down pause when you power it on, it dumps the ROM for the original Asteroids instead of Asteroids Deluxe.
Hmm.
So that's how you play it on there, and it is a port of the original Vector game. It's not the Asteroids for 7800. And I will say too, the Asteroids Deluxe port that he made is very, very impressive. Again, this is really impressive stuff for the hardware. Not only does he replicate the vector style graphics pretty well with sprites, obviously not with vectors. It replicates the look and feel of the game really well, but it also adds extra modes that were not in the original arcade game. So there's two different two-player modes. One is a competition mode where you're playing against the other person and you can destroy each other, and the other is a team play mode where you have to work together. So none of those were in the original game. Plus, it includes the original asteroids. So again, really, really impressive on the programming side.
Yeah, and the 78 specific version of asteroids is pretty good version. I'm not like asteroids crazy in terms of just like it's getting the top 10 for me, but I like the game quite a bit. I'll definitely play it all the way back to kind of original arcade one for before Asteroid Deluxe for the arcade came out. Um, and so it's a good game. 7800 was a really nice looking version of that.
Yeah, and this I highly recommend if you're even a little bit into asteroids, it's definitely worth picking this cartridge up. 30 bucks. You get a great version of Asteroids Deluxe with way more features than the actual arcade game had, plus a port of the arcade version of the original Asteroids, all on the same cartridge, not split up into two cartridges like Berserk and Frenzy.
Yeah, and this just I'm reimposing Mike's spoiler alert for how you get the original version of Asteroids dumped instead of the newer one. Um, there was, hey, there's a clue in the main. They go, hey, there's a clue in the manual about how to do it. And I'm not going to get the wording exactly right, but it was kind of like, well, just wait a little bit before you start to play it again, and you'll probably figure it out. Which is a pretty strong finger pointing towards the pause button, but eluded me 100%. I was like, time sensitive? Do I have to do it at midnight? So, I don't know. So now, did you figure it out, or did you use the
No,
internet?
so it was through reading about the homebrew stuff that I saw a lot of people speculating on whether or not it was included on there. Then I watched a review on YouTube and they were like, hey, it is included on there. And this is how you do it. They're like, but it is heavily hinted at in the book. So I didn't even read the manual first. Then I got the game, saw it in the manual. I was like, all right, that makes sense. And tried it out. It worked right away.
Cool. So you like the gameplay on it, you like the look, you like the access to the homebrew market. So not such a big fan of the button placement on the controller.
Yeah, I wish that was a little better, but again, this looks true to the original controller. So I did see a video where somebody held it up against the original version. It looks identical to it, including the little finger joystick that you can screw on and off of it. Which again, I didn't have this, but that was pretty common at the time, or when I was a kid, at least for PC controllers. A lot of them worked like that. It had a little joystick knob that you could screw into the D-pad.
Yeah, the D-pad I had for the Amiga um, came with one of those, so which I never used, but it was still nice.
Yeah, I'm never going to use it, but it's included in there.
It's good. Um, so anything else on that?
No, I mean, I'm looking forward to. So, my timing, I guess, was poor when I ordered a couple of games off of Atari Age. It's taken a little while to get here. So, I did email them. They got back to me right away. They were super nice about everything, but apparently they're moving to a different location. So, that slowed down shipping, but I should be getting it soon. So, I ordered two games that I've been looking at for quite a while, actually. I've seen multiple reviews of them. One is a horror game for 2600 called Unholy that looked pretty interesting. The other one is a game that I've seen a lot about, and a lot of reviews about, called Spies in the Night for 2600. I don't know if you have any familiarity with that, Kelly. It looks great. It looks very simple, but it looks really cool. It's inspired by like black and white film noir
Oh, cool.
movies. And the game is in black and white. It uses grayscale graphics to kind of approximate a black and white movie look. And the graphics, it looks very simple, but really, really good for 2600. It looks like a game where they're really using the limitations of the system to their advantage. So essentially, you have to sneak up on various locations. I know it starts with a lighthouse and blow up the locations without being seen. So there's a lighthouse in the distance, and there's a really nice looking effect of the light spinning around. So if you get caught in the light when it spins back to the front of the screen, you'll be seen and snipers will kill you. So you have to dodge behind objects and things like that every time the light comes around.
And then you get some of that Atari Halloween blood coming out.
The
Red
graphics
pixels of
look
doom.
surprisingly good for 2600 from the footage that I've seen. So I'm really looking forward to it.
Excellent. Well, we'd certainly like to hear from any of the folks watching the video. If you have experience with the 7800, did Mike compel you now to go out and get it? It will, I'm not sure. I'm assuming this is an Amazon orderable kind of thing. If it
Yes.
is,
Mhm.
we'll have a link to our using our affiliate link so that we can get 1 billionth of a penny or 47 Atari tokens for any sales there. But we are an Amazon associate,
Yeah, it's
and
$130 for the system, one wireless controller, and Bentley Bear.
pretty good deal. Really good deal. I mean, that's not much more than some of the higher end mini counts, the minis. So very good. Cool. Well, I'm glad you're enjoying it.
Are you
And
tempted at all, Kelly?
what's that?
Are you
Tempted?
tempted at all?
Still, I don't have the vast tracts of land that you have available to continue to pile stuff up. So I have to be selective, and I'm just kind of thinking it might be interesting because, uh, post Nintendo 64 went the PlayStation route. So I've really had very limited Xbox experience, and we can, get Conker's Bad Fur Day. A remix of it on an Xbox version. So I was like, oh, that might be kind of fun to do. Probably more on that particular game later off of Bog Panda. Again, please subscribe. We've got merchandise. You should take a look at that. And of course, by subscribing, you'll be able to listen to Hard No, the world's shortest podcast. We also have a link. Wow, this is a long tail end stuff, but just one more, folks. Hang in there. Bog Panda Vision's out there, which is off of our website, which is a collection of games that one way or another we have brought to life, and they're all free currently. There's kind of multiple downloadable Game Boy ROMs for Slapdash, and a another kind of online based game called Dr. Mike. You should check that out. Uh, there's some Commodore 64 code that Mike spent hours working on that you should, take a look at. And and Bog Panda Vision, of course, it's a struggle there because we've got G Mike Lies a Lot, the official mascot of the Bog Panda YouTube channel, but I'm in Slapdash, so I don't know. I guess I'm gonna have to have it out with G Mike, who the official gaming
Fighting
mascot
game
is.
is what you're saying.
What's that?
So you're saying we need a fighting game.
I think we may need to do that. Cool. Well, thanks for watching, everybody.
Thanks, everybody.
Bog Panda.